For today's episode, we reunited two Florida football legends, two college Hall of Fame coaches, Coach Steve Spurrier and Bobby Bowden. Take a look. This is an exciting moment for us here at Florida Rising Stars. We have two legends in the building. We have Bobby Bowden, the man, the myth, the legend himself, and we have Steve Spurrier. So we have a few quick questions here for you. So this first question is for you, Coach Spurrier. What comes to mind when you hear the name Bobby Bowden?
Coach Bowden had probably the greatest run in the history of college football between 1987 and 2000. I think they finished in the top 4, top 5 in the nation every year. 14 straight years. They played probably the toughest schedule back in those days because they played Miami and Florida. I tell people all the time, if they'd have dropped just one of us two, he would have had maybe 5 or 6 national championships. That's how good those teams were back in those days. But since they played us and we played them, it knocked probably both of us out of maybe a couple of national championships during that time. But I'm sure Coach Bowden was the winningest coach in college football all through that era. And I think the Gators, we were second through the 90s. So we had some good teams down here in Florida. And Coach Bowden, he won more than I did during that time. So you got to say he's the best.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Hats off to that. Coach Bowden, so I have the same question for you, but reverse. What comes to mind when you hear the name Steve Spurrier?
Well, here's what comes to mind to me. The first thing, when I first started coaching, and in the first years of college football, it was understood you had to run the ball to win a national championship. If you can't run the ball, you're not going to win a national championship. Steve came along in the 90s and proved that you can win a national championship featuring the passing game. He showed the nation, hey, you can win it with your running game, but you can also win it with your passing game. And he did this. In fact, he beat us in the Sugar Bowl to win the national championship. And nobody could throw the ball like Steve Spurrier.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so you hit on what was going to be one of my upcoming questions, so we could go ahead and get into it now. What really made Steve's offense different? What separated them during that time period? And what do you think made him more of a visionary to be willing to go out and take that risk during those times?
Well, number one, he was a great teacher of the passer. He would get good high school football players that threw the ball. Then he'd teach them how to throw the ball. And he was daring. He was daring. You never knew what he was going to do. And I've seen him on 4th and 8 throw a touchdown pass. You're supposed to punt.
Right. Right.
But, he just dared you to knock it down, man. And he had good receivers. I think one year he had 2 receivers, maybe might have been first round. He might have had more than that. But let me say this. I'm glad I'm talking to him today and not playing.
Coach Spurrier, what do you think was the key to Coach Bowden's longevity over that time period that you mentioned there? What do you think was the key to his success?
Well, first of all, he convinced his players at Florida State that they were good enough to beat anybody in the country. When he got to FSU way back in the 80s, I guess sometime, right, Coach?
Yeah, late 70s.
Late 70s, okay, yeah, 79 or 80, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
FSU was just another school out there. They were independent, and they were not feared by a whole bunch of people. And what Coach Bowden had to do, he had to schedule some tough teams. I think he went to Nebraska and, some SEC schools to let people know, hey, we can play with the top teams in the country. So after they went and started beating those good teams, Certainly the recruiting picked up at FSU, and they were right there in the top 5 in recruiting about every year. I think they out-recruited us most of the years that I was at Florida. But he established the winning tradition at FSU, and that's what all coaches have to do. They have to get that mindset into their team. Hey, fellas, we can do it. Now let's go do it. We have no excuses. Eliminate all those excuses and convince your players they're good enough to go win. And certainly that's what I tried to do my early years here in Florida, is convince our players we're good enough to go do it. We got to believe. You got to believe to start with. And then after that, it's performance. And Coach Bowden got his coaches, he got his players, everyone involved in their program with that attitude that they can go beat anybody in the nation.
Absolutely. Okay. Coach Bowden, what would be different in your preparation on a week when you guys were going to play against Spurrier's Gators, especially on the years when you guys played in the swamp?
Number one, you can imagine we didn't like to play in the swamp. that Steve had that thing sewed up, boy. I mean, he had that crowd into it. He had it packed, and you knew you would get your hands full that day, And but when we prepared to play Coach Spurrier, we spent a lot of time on the passing game. If it was 1st and 10 or 2nd and short or 3rd and long or 3rd and medium or whatever, you didn't know what the guy was going to do, and he dared do some outstanding things. And he did it with full confidence. I remember when I used to play against Steve, I used to get the feeling, I said, he's in the game. I mean, he thinks he's playing. The way he runs his team and calls those plays, you would think he's playing, And he did. He got his kids where they believed they could win too, And in the state of Florida, Steve is proud, and I am too. Florida State, and Miami. I think one time we're 1, 2, 3 in the nation. I think. If it wasn't, we were close, all of us. Football, and I mean, if you played in the state of Florida, if you could beat Florida and Miami, you won the national championship that year. Because they were 2 of the better teams in the nation.
Right. Okay, and then Coach Spurrier, what changed or what was different in preparing for the Seminole teams during that year, and then especially on the years when you played in Doak Campbell?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, they were always in the top 5 in the nation, top 4 most of the time. So we played them. They were either 1, 2, 3, 4, something like that. So they were always one of the best teams in the country. So, and it was a huge game every year. A lot of times, if the winner of it may have a chance to go on to the national championship game. But it was a huge game. But since we were in different conferences, we still had a chance to win the SEC, even if we lost to them, which happens sometimes. And then they had certainly a chance to win the ACC championship after they joined that conference a little later on. So we had a game after the season, and then but the winner of that one, if he was in position to go on for the national championship, that made it that important.
Coach Spurrier, what do you feel is a lesson either on the field or off the field that you learned from playing against Coach Bowden?
Oh, just trying to totally prepare your team all the time if you're going to have a chance to win. We never did win up at his place at Doak Campbell. You're talking about a tough place to play. We got a tie there one year. But other than that, we beat them a few times at our place, and we were fortunate to have one of the best games I guess our team's ever played in that national championship Sugar Bowl way back after the 96 season. So anyway, it was always a heck of a ball game, and it was usually 2 of the best teams in the country going at it.
Okay. Coach Bowden, with Florida Rising Stars Project, we do speak to a lot of the youth. A lot of our audience is in middle school age and high school age who could go on to be coaches. What would you say is a trait that is important to be a great coach?
Well, I think the big trait is always be honest. I used to tell my boys, the boys, don't lie to me, and I'm not going to lie to you. And so, being honest with each other, where you can that way you can depend on that other person, And I think you've got to have that. You got to have a lot of things, but that's one of them.
And then Coach Spurrier, in the same regard, a lot of our audience being middle school age, high school age, aspiring players, what would you say is a key trait to being a great player?
Well, first of all, you need to be born with a certain amount of talent, and you have to have that work ethic and commitment to be the best conditioned player you can possibly be. But the real great players are also the wonderful teammates. I look back on our teams that achieved so much, and usually your star players have got to be your best teammate guys also. They got to be more concerned for the team than they are individually about themselves. So that's a characteristic and trait that you hope you have within your team with your top players. So we tried to emphasize being a great teammate as well as being an outstanding player.
Okay. Coach Bowden, so you mentioned things like Coach Spurrier calling the pass on 4th and 8, different gutsy plays that he's willing to do. Is there a play or a certain call in the game that you would like to ask Coach Spurrier about? Like, what made you go with that?
I tell you what, I'll always remember. I've forgotten what year it was, but we went in down to play in the swamp. We were undefeated. I think we might have been 11-0 or 10-0. And if we win the Florida game, we're going to win a national championship, or at least we're going to play for the national championship. And that son of a gun beat us. And he used two quarterbacks. And I always remember that. But the thing I can remember, I think we had the lead late in the game, and he had it might have been first down, and he hit a takeoff to his wide receiver on the left over the head of our defensive back and got about 30 or something yards out of it. Then he broke a run, and finally he scored a touchdown. And we came back, but we couldn't catch him, and he beat us that day, and I'll never forget that one.
And then, Coach Spurrier, you mentioned things like never winning a game up in Doak Campbell, but obviously you guys were both saw great success during the period where you both were coaching down here in Florida. Is there a specific game that stands out to you more than others that you coached in against Coach Bowden?
Well, the Sugar Bowl is my favorite game, that's for sure. That's the one we won to win the national championship. And but we had several disappointing games that we were close and didn't quite make it. And then very disappointing, had a huge lead on the game up at Campbell. And Coach Bowden's team scored 28 in the fourth quarter to tie us up. So that was a little disappointing. But, yeah, there was too many. I think one of the really all-time great games was the one in the swamp where Warwick Dunn caught a little pass in the flat and went about 80 yards for a touchdown to put it out of sight for us. We were only behind, I think, 6 at the time, and we had some momentum going, and that was like a 3rd and 10 play that Warwick Dunn, Charlie Ward hit him, and he went about 80 yards for a touchdown. So anyway, it was really loud at the swamp that day. And it was loud that night, the one we won also in 97.
Coach Bowden, while we have Coach Spurrier here and we have an audience that will see this, you guys are both legends here in the state of Florida, have great admiration for each other. Is there a message in front of the audience you'd like to give Coach Spurrier while we have him on?
Well, I just wanted him to know, and I think he does know, that I always respected him. When I was an assistant coach at Florida State, back in 1964, I believe Steve's maybe he might have been his freshman or sophomore year. It may have been his sophomore year. And I remember playing against him that year. Now, he was a backup, but when Florida got behind, he came in, And then I followed his career. But, one of the greatest things, and Steve has not mentioned it, is what he did at Duke. Duke's not a national power. When you start looking at the top 10, don't worry about Duke. He ain't going to be there.
Right.
And yet, when he coached them, I think he either tied or won the conference championship. One of his best jobs. And that happened before he came to University of Florida. Now, when he came to the University of Florida, the Florida State game many times was game of the year. Game of the year, we had some great battles. So I played him in the Sugar Bowl, and we beat him one year. The next year, we played him in the Sugar Bowl again. He beat us and won the national championship. And it was a game broadcast all over the nation, not just in the South or Southeast, But let me just say again, I'm glad I'm not playing him.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then, Coach Spurrier, we would essentially ask you the same question. We have an opportunity. We have Coach Bowden here with us today. Is there a message that you'd like to share with him in front of our audience?
Oh, a message? Well, gosh, we've already had our games and our battles, and Coach won more of them than I did. But it was always a challenge going against the FSU teams back in the 90s and 2000. It was always a challenge. But we had a whole lot of games all the way through the stretch there. So both of us knew that the outcome of this game was certainly very important. But what you do in the entire season is, I think, what you are remembered by when it's all over with. And obviously, in the state of Florida, that was our big game. So you get bragging rights for the entire year. And they had them a few more times than we did, but we won. I think we beat them about as much as anybody, except maybe Miami. Miami may have beat them one or two more times during the 90s than we did. But he had great teams, and it was always a good battle to go against them.
All right, so a moment you guys share is the Sugar Bowl. Something unique we'd like you guys to do is, could you walk us through that week, the both of you together, could you walk us through that week of preparing for the Sugar Bowl and then playing in the Sugar Bowl?
The time that Florida won the national championship, I remember it vividly. I think they had a 4-point lead at the half, and we're still in the ball game. But the second half, they shut us down, and I think he scored 52 points that day. And he didn't try to run it up. It's just they earned 52 points. That's the thing I remember about that game.
Well, yeah, thank you, Coach. That was one of the biggest games, obviously, in my career down here in 12 years. But it was 24-20 at half, and second half, everything seemed to go our way. And I think we only threw one pass in the fourth quarter. And one of the nicest things Coach Bowden used to say about our teams, about running the ball. And he said, Steve and the Gators, yeah, they run the ball, but they wait till they're about 3 or 4 touchdowns ahead before they start doing it. Right. So we threw to score. And if we make a whole bunch of points, then you can hopefully make a lot of first downs and keep that clock running in the fourth quarter. So we had good runners too. Fred Taylor, Eric Rett, and several, Ernest Graham, so many guys that could do that for us also.
Just one more question we have. That'd be a shared question for both of you. We'd like to get some of your input of the state of today's game. So what are some things you like about football, college football today, and maybe even some things that you prefer the previous way of doing things?
To me, and I'm having to gauge on last year, because this year is up question marks.
Right.
But in regard to football last year, I think it's the best it's ever been. I think it gets better every year. You know what? But now off the field, that's another question. Off the field action is probably run a lot of coaches out of it. You know what? But on the field, I think it's as good as it's ever been. I think it's exciting. And like I said, Steve has showed the nation you can win with a passing game. And you see more of that now. And you see more people split out. Everybody using 3 and 4 wide receivers, So it's opened the game up. It's very exciting. And I don't know what's going to happen this year. But, gee, I hope they can play.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think all of us former coaches are really pulling for college football to play this year and have a season, have the conference championship games, and even a national championship playoff. So we hope that occurs. I think most of the teams, the coaches and players are doing the quarantine, the social distance, the way that it's prescribed at all the universities. So if they can do that and keep that virus out of the team, we got a chance to finish the entire year and go from there. Obviously, the NBA basketball has done a super job. I don't think they've had a positive test, and they've been playing, a couple of months now or so forth. So it can be done, and we're certainly hoping it will be done. College football now, the players are so much faster and in better physical shape. The conditioning year-round is probably a little superior as we go year to year now. So that's one thing about college football. They're fast and they're in super shape, all these guys. And hopefully we get to watch it this year. I think Florida's got a good team. FSU sort of in a rebuilding mode, I guess, a little bit. But they got ball players up there. And it'd be interesting to see what they do this year.
Excellent. Okay. A quick question, and this would be for Coach Bowden in regards to the Gator Nation. Coach Bowden, who would you say player-wise was the best Gator that comes to mind, Florida Gator that comes to mind?
They had a bunch of them, but I liked Werfel.
Yeah.
I liked Werfel. I mean, Steve did a great job throwing that dadgum ball, but I liked Werfel. I liked what he stood for and the kind of guy he was, and I really admire him.
And then, Coach Spurrier, who would you say would be your top Seminole, your top FSU Seminole?
I would say Charlie Ward. I got to know Charlie pretty well through the Heisman Trophy events and so forth. And he's a lot like Danny Werfel. He's a first-class young man, and he fine Christian young man, and he spreads the message. He lets people know where he stands and tries to be a big influence on the young people in our country today. So Charlie Ward and Danny Werfel, I think, are two of the best. Those are players that we hope to coach all the time, those type of young men.
Excellent. Okay. All right, coaches. Well, it was great to have you guys reunited here on our show. We appreciate you guys coming. Before we sign off, is there any last thing that you guys would like to say to each other?
Yeah, I'd like to say that it was a great pleasure talking to Steve today, and I am still so happy that I didn't have to play him.
Well, Coach, you beat me more than I beat you, that's for sure. But, yeah, congratulations on all the success through the years that your team's had there at FSU. And fortunately, Coach Bowden and I are the winningest coaches at our programs. Somebody may break my record, but, Coach, your record at FSU will never be broken, that's for sure.